already have one.
I've got a handheld out if you want
You're
it.
not going to read this whole thing.
Is that a little?
Because you pass
They
it
have
out,
it.
they could read it.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? You came back for week 3. We're halfway through. There you go. All right. Clearly we need some more activities. I'll tell Natalie. So welcome. Today we have a really fantastic session for you. And a lot of it is going to be less charts and graphs and slides like the past 2 have been. So today is really a lot more of 2 deep and meaningful conversations. One with a former board member, chair of the board actually, and now a resident here, and one from a current TRWG board member who was also a former CCRC board member. So a lot of what they're going to say today is just more history and diving into their roles within the organization and some viewpoints. So today is a lot more, I think, listening than having to focus on a lot of the slides. But as always, we do have the handouts for you that had some important documents to refer back to. So Raymond is going to start for us today, and then some of your feedback from past surveys has been, can we please take a 5-minute break? So yes, after Raymond's section is done, we will break for 5 minutes, bathroom, you can grab some more coffee, cookies, water, and then we'll turn it over to me and Diane, having a little chat up here, and then turn it over for questions. Some of your feedback from past sessions has been that bathroom break, so we've added that. A big piece of feedback from last week's meeting was to please hold all questions until the end of the meeting. A few people found that disruptive last time, so we will ask that you hold all of your questions until the very end. There are, like we have done in the past, there are some sections in the back of your packet that say notes and questions, or you can also write them on the slide that you think it pertains to, so that way you won't forget when we come back to the Q&A. Also take a minute, some of the feedback was if people could check their cell phones and make sure that those are silenced or turned off. And then the last one was if you're asking a question, please hold the mic directly at your mouth and speak like you want to be heard. So as the microphones go around today for questions, please just hold it up nice and close to your mouth so that everyone can hear. And as a reminder, if you don't have the microphone, people watching on YouTube or from the in-house TV channel won't be able to hear your question. So we will do those. We might be down a mic, who knows?
I don't have any.
Some of the handouts in your packet today, just to give you an overview, because some of them won't be slides, but I found them to be helpful information for you to look at and review. And that way you can kind of digest some of this on your own. So we do have the full bios for Raymond. We have the bios for all of the members of the CCRC board as well as the TRWG board. We have a CCRC board statement of mutual expectations. We have the process for board decisions with conflicting priorities. That speaks to one of the biggest questions we got last week, which is, what if multiple communities have things going on? How would the board manage those conflicting priorities? So we do have a policy statement around that. We also have what's called a resident engagement philosophy statement. That one is really critical for you to read and absorb. And then also what's called a resident engagement process. So those are in there for you to take back home, read, and we'll revisit some of that in a future session as well. So our first speaker today is our wonderful and fabulous Mr. Raymond Goodman. A lot of you do know that he spent many years as a professor at UNH. And he also served as chair of the board of Riverwoods for many years and was also a trustee. His full bio is in there, so he just said, please don't read all of it to everyone, they can read. So I am very honored that he wanted to help me present today. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Raymond take the stage.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I asked that because my voice is a little bit hoarse. It has been for a month or so. It's not COVID, by the way. It's just a hoarse voice, so that's why I asked for the lavalier mic. And, you know, generally, I've been speaking for about 40 years in front of groups, off and on and so forth, and I seldom get nervous, except today. Why? Why today? Because I'm speaking to my friends and people that I know, and it always feels like you have to perform a little bit better when you know who the people are that are out there. But I'll start by talking about a little bit of history about the CCRC business, or the CCRCs in general. And they started a little bit more than 100 years ago around the Philadelphia area. And they started because there were very well-intentioned ministers, pastors, preachers, whoever, whatever term you'd like to use. And when that person's people, the people that went to his church, started aging, and he felt he needed to take care of them, he or she. I guess probably back then it was more than likely a he. And so the system was back then that people would give all of their assets to the church, and he in turn would take care of them for the rest of their lives. And that worked very well for a while. But then it became pretty obvious that the complexity of a CCRC, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and I suspect Diane will too, became so complex that it required professional managers to come in and replace the person that did that, so that the people that had given all of their money wouldn't lose all of their money. And so today, we have a whole slew of professional management people who run CCRCs, and that sort of goes back to the very history of it. So why did I get involved? When I started out being in the hotel business. And I worked for a couple of years out of high school in the hotel business. And then I ended up got a business degree from Southwest Texas State University, now Texas State University, and then went to Cornell for the hotel school, because that was the field that I wanted to do. For any of you that are lawyers in the background, my dad was a lawyer, and I really didn't want to be a lawyer when I saw what he did, and I ended up choosing the hotel industry. And one day when I was giving a summer seminar to industry professionals, all different kinds of industries in training, one of the people in there came up to me after we presented, and he said, you know more about my business than I do. And I said, oh, I don't think so. And his name was Shelley Smith. Shelley Smith worked for Vericare Incorporated out of Rochester, New York. And they ran 10 or 12 skilled nursing facilities. And hello. Did the generator start up? I don't think this changed, did it?
Yes, you'd hit that every time.
Did we lose power?
Yeah.
Too bad we don't have the soggy po' boys here right now. They could do some entertainment as we're working through this.
Oh, we're still live. But we're on the deck. Yep.
Can you hear me? Yep, that's still on.
Keep talking while we try to get those slides
Sure, if you're.
I'm going to ask Raymond to keep talking while we just work to get the whole system back up.
So beginning in 1982, I began working with Shelley as a consultant, because he wanted to have a community, or in that case, a nursing center, that was more hospitality oriented, and we kind of coined the term healthcare hospitality. And so I did some consulting work with him that led me to the National Association of Senior Living Industries, where I served on the board. And they used to seat us in alphabetical order, and I sat next to a gentleman, Chuck Griffin Goodman, and he said, you know, they're developing this retirement community in Exeter, New Hampshire, right close to where you live, where we lived in Durham. And he said, I think you need to be on the board because a lot of the people on the board have no idea what they're doing. So that's the history of it too, as I mentioned. So I did. I asked Avery Rockefeller, who was the person that was doing the development back then, and so I got on the board around 1990. I'm not sure of the exact date, either the late 80s or early 1990s, and that was a wonderful experience. We were talking about Riverwoods Exeter. Well, it was just a piece of dirt in the ground. And of course, 4 years later, in 1994, is when we opened the doors. Somewhere in there, oh, by the way, I was on the board for a total of 17 or 18 years, and 10 of those years I was the chair of the board at Riverwoods Exeter. And we did a lot of great things, which we'll talk about briefly. The other thing that I did, and I would hope that some of the board members take advantage of this, is I went to a lot of conferences, and I wasn't one of those people who would go to a conference and drink beer on the side. I was interested in learning that much about the industry, so I went to every single presentation that I possibly could to make that transition from the hotel industry into senior living, which I did. And what I learned is that we are a charitable organization, a 501c3. There were a few people that were in the for-profit sector, and the people that I was with primarily were the not-for-profit people in the conferences that I went to, but there was another group that started the for-profit business, and I'll speak to that in just a little bit later. You and me, Helen and I, have put our trust in Riverwoods, and that's why we moved in here. So it's difficult, as I told you, because I'm speaking to people that I know, but you put your trust when you moved in here into Riverwoods' reputation, a 25-year reputation of being at the top of the line of single site, initially, retirement communities. Most of them, 80% of the retirement communities in the country are faith-based. Episcopal churches, Jewish homes, Catholic charities, and on and on and on. There are very, very few that stand alone as that don't have a religious organization backing them up. So you put your reputation, or the reason you signed up was you had your reputation of Riverwoods in general. Riverwoods has an accreditation, so by having an accreditation, that says something about the finances, and it says something about the way that it's managed. You put your trust in Riverwoods because it has a Fitch rating. Riverwoods of Exeter has a Fitch rating. We here, Riverwoods Durham, we do not yet, because you have to be in business for some time to show that you're worthy of a Fitch rating. You put your trust in the boards of trustees, both the CCRC board and the group board. You put your trust in the State Finance and Insurance Authority. You put your trust in the Director of Charitable Trust of the New Hampshire Department of Justice. So that's pretty serious stuff. And more important, you've put your trust in the executive management here. Boards of trustees are the people that put Kim in her place and Justine in her place. Maybe that doesn't sound right. Put them in their leadership positions. And way back when, we started with the 3 legs of the stool, and that was with Justine's predecessor, Frank Crane, who believed in a 3-legged stool, as he would repeat many, many times. Who are the 3 legs? Well, it was the trustees, it was management, and indeed residents. And when I took over as the chairman of the board, there was a kind of a difficult relationship with my predecessor, and it kind of explains that in this book over there that was written, the one on your right. The book on the book here is a book that I wrote about retirement communities back in 1990. So it's really dated if you think about it. I felt it was very important that we included residents on the board. And from all of the people in industry, they said, don't do it. That's really bad. You really don't want residents that are on the board because of the fiduciary responsibilities and on and so forth. We believed in our residents. We knew who they were. Some of them were incredibly talented. Justine could repeat some of the names and some of the advantages that they shared with us and made things really work well. So we had, I think, 2 or 3 residents on the board in the early days, and they were unbelievably helpful to us, thinking not only about resident issues, but also many of them had experience with not-for-profits and with for-profits, and they helped us think like business people. So I think I'll move the slide here. So the mission, as we mentioned several times, that we are a charitable organization. And our mission statement says, which, by the way, I'm informed that next month it's going to change. And I asked, could you let me tell them the new mission statement? And they said, oh no, that's got to be rolled out. So next month, they're going to have a new mission statement, but it's going to be similar to the current one, which says the opportunity to provide community purpose and peace of mind. And I had a colleague, Ross Gattell, who we were on the executive committee of the then Whittemore School, now the Paul College at the University of New Hampshire. The department chairs, Ross was the department chair of the management department. I was department chair of hotel administration, hospitality management. Ross is now the president of Bryant College down in Rhode Island. And he served on the Riverwoods Exeter board after I had left there. And he had a statement that really rings true. He says, for-profits cut and run. And we've had evidence of that. Not-for-profits stick and stay. So I take a look, a not-for-profit is designed to live into perpetuity. So think of a local church. The preacher, the minister, the pastor is going to be there, but he or she doesn't own anything, and that organization is to continue into perpetuity, and that's exactly the situation that we have here. I'm on the right slide, I guess. Members of the boards owe their fiduciary responsibility to the organization, not to you specifically, but to the organization. And maybe some of you know or don't know that the members of the boards, both of the group board and of the CCRC board, are not paid. So yes, I worked for 18 years and never got paid. What was that response to that? Is that a disbelief? It is, maybe so. Residents are beneficiaries and not fiduciaries, although you have a strong voice. And that strong voice comes through with the residents that you have on the board, which is unique to the industry. As I mentioned, most of the organizations like ours do not put residents on the board for whatever reasons they feel. We feel differently about that. And when we talk about the apartment that you live in and the fact that you paid an entry fee and then you pay a monthly maintenance fee, you have a right to use that space for the rest of your life. That's why it's called a life care community, CCRC, continuing care throughout the life. They have changed the name somewhat, but it doesn't stick to actually be called life care communities. Some places refer to themselves as life care communities because the term CCRC is somewhat confusing, and they wanted to remove the word care from the title. Continuing care retirement communities. They wanted to make it sound more in the hospitality vein. So we also have to grow and change. And I have an analogy that I shared years ago with Justine, and when we were talking, she says, you've got to tell them about the train analogy. So when I was teaching in Switzerland, I had an apartment that overlooked Lake Geneva. It was wonderful. I was teaching at a hotel school there, and I'm actually on the board of that today, although I transition off in October, which is sad because I don't get to go to Switzerland anymore, and they do pay me. And looking up the hill, there was several train tracks. And one day there was this one train that was stopped here and another train that was moving. And visually, it looked like the train that was stopped was actually moving backwards. It wasn't. But that's the image that I have. And I thought about management, and that it kind of feels that way, that if someone's moving forward and someone is standing still, it actually looks like they're moving backwards. And Justine said, please share that analogy. What we see is that if we don't grow, if we don't perpetuate ourselves, not only a single community, but as a system, there are people that would like to come into our market area. So we have waiting lists, both at Riverwoods Exeter. We have a waiting list, a long waiting list. Kim can share the exact numbers of the people that are on the waiting list for Riverwoods Durham. Well, if you're in business and you see this latent demand out there, wouldn't that invite you to come into the marketplace? Certainly. So if we don't take that charge, which by the way, is exactly what we did when we first expanded to the Ridge, from Riverwoods Exeter to the Ridge, because we saw this latent demand and we had this long waiting list. We had a 5-year waiting list. And we said, if we don't do something, somebody's gonna move into our area. So we have a threat primarily from the for-profits. Why? Because there's a lot of money chasing business. And you know how many trillions of dollars are sitting out there on the sidelines looking to place money somewhere. They can't put it in the bank. It's too much money to earn a little bit of interest in the bank. So they're looking for opportunities. So the for-profits are a threat that we have. Maybe not, it may not be a type A CCRC, which we are because of the complexity, but it could be an assisted living, a standalone assisted living, like Sunrise Communities, for example. Or it could be a separate memory support. But in any case, that's competitive entry, and we need to be aware of competitive entry, and that's the purpose of the group board, is to look outward, I guess is a better word, to see if there's anybody that's coming into our market area. And I think Justine has mentioned that for years and years I've been saying, even though I wasn't on the board, I said there's an incredible market in between Dover and Durham. And I kept telling her, Justine, you need to build into that market because you've got 2 main highways going on either side of you. And the way that Portsmouth is overcrowded and people are moving up here. We're here and broke all kinds of records by moving in faster than any community in the entire country. I think it was 6 weeks we were filled. 6 weeks? 5 weeks? Okay. 4 months. It was really, really fast. In fact, going back to Riverwoods Exeter, it took us a long time to fill up. So much so that at one time, one of the board members said, okay, people aren't interested, let's pull out. Avery Rockefeller had invested $3 million. He said, wait a minute, we don't want to pull out right now. I have $3 million invested. We're moving forward as much as we can. And a gentleman who did marketing, his name was Skip Kedney, came and rented an apartment in Exeter, and he stayed on site to make sure that everybody was doing what they could do in order to get the numbers of people that we did, and actually we did. Took a little time, but we got there. And then all of a sudden, Riverwoods Exeter became a shining star in the industry. And so the various industry conferences that we went to, we were always up on the board because of the way that we had done things and the way that we had managed, which is where you put your trust. The other thing that growing and change is that somebody needs to assess the risk that's going out there, as I talked about, and also to continue its charitable mission. So in the early days, we thought that by having what was called a Big E, we had an auction and we raised a lot of money, and we thought, well, if we give that money to charity, which we did, we built a school playground, we gave money to the teen center to improve them. This was over time. And we thought that made us a charitable 501c3 charitable organization. Well, our chief counsel at the time, Charlie Tucker, said that doesn't make you 501c3. In fact, unbeknownst to you, perhaps, is that the larger units here at Riverwood Durham pay a premium, and the smaller units are subsidized by the payment of the larger units. So we are internally a charitable organization, and that's what allows us, among other things, to maintain its charitable mission and our federal income tax-free organization. So if we were to lose the 501c3 because we didn't continue to pursue our charitable mission, IRS checks on you. And they would come in and say, excuse me, you're not a charitable organization, and the federal income tax is gonna come your way. The available assets process is something I know nothing about. There's a formula out there, and some money is put to the Riverwoods Group. This is critically important, by the way, because the Riverwoods Group looks out 10, 15 years, maybe 5 years, to see what competition might be coming into our area. More important than that, perhaps, maybe not more important, is that the group serves as a firewall so that if anything were to happen if they were to make an investment somewhere, as they did for Riverwoods Durham, so the initial investment was funded by the group. If that group wasn't there and we put money at risk, like we did with Riverwoods Exeter to build the Ridge, we put Riverwoods Exeter's money at risk because we felt that with all of the feasibility studies and the actuarial studies that we had done, that we were going to be successful, and indeed we were. It filled up very quickly, the Ridge did, because we had the reputation going forward with the Woods, which back then was just Riverwoods. It's a very important aspect to have that separated, and the director of the charitable trust at the state felt that that was exactly the same thing. So I don't know the formula. I don't want to know the formula. I just know that that money that we put into the Riverwoods Group is used to fund various things to continue our charitable mission. That's an important, from the income tax standpoint, as well as from keeping competitive entry out of our marketplace. Peter Drucker, some of you may know of Peter Drucker, the very, very, very famous management philosopher, used to say that the purpose of business is to stay in business. So you do what you can do to stay in business. That's an important piece. And in the not-for-profit business, we don't talk about profit, and you've heard this before with other speakers, where we talk about no margin, no mission. If you don't make a little bit of profit, margin, you're not going to be in business. And I was at a conference in Washington one time with a group of other people, the executive directors, and they said, and chairmen of the board, and they said, well, what's the difference in a not-for-profit and the for-profit? And people said, well, we have a charitable mission, and we have this, and we have that, and we have so on and so forth, and we treat our people better because we're not profit-oriented. And I said, there's only one reason. It's the tax status. That's the reason. Because if we are a 501c3, we do not pay federal income tax. Can you only imagine what federal income taxes would do to the cost of living here in lieu of not having to pay that? We do pay taxes to the town. I think you all know that. It's called a payment in lieu of taxes, abbreviated PILOT, or the pilot thing. And that's for the services that we do use. Back then, we had a choice. Our choice was to go to court and say that we are a charitable organization and we should pay no taxes, like the local church. We decided not to do that because we figured that if we lost, it would be more expensive than negotiating a pilot agreement with the town of Exeter and deciding that we would pay a certain amount, which would have been less than otherwise, and for the various service, ambulance services, fire, and road repairs, and so forth. So the group's responsibility, the boards, the two boards that we're talking about, are, and I'll read from the document, I hate to read, but I'll read from the document from the director of at the Department of Justice of the state. The group is to establish, maintain, and govern an integrated system of CCR communities and related organizations, provide central management and administrative services, develop a system-wide strategic plan, develop relationships and alliances, and identify other organizations to join the system, that is to say Manchester and now Riverwoods Durham. Develop methods and technology to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of each one of our individual communities. Boards are there to maximize the benefits as regards quality and financial liabilities. The group board serves, as I mentioned before, and very important as a firewall. So, and many of you know what a firewall is. If, for example, the group decided to expand and do something someplace else, let's say in Dover, and all of a sudden it went boom in the night and it didn't work out, that would never affect Riverwoods Durham. It wouldn't affect Riverwoods Exeter. It wouldn't affect Riverwoods Manchester. So there's a wonderful firewall in between any future development to maintain our charitable mission or not. And that's an important piece. Each community retains their own assets and responsible for their own liabilities. So we stand on our own petard. Some of you know what that means. Did anyone give me the definition? Knowledgeable people. When I took over, I mentioned that we put residents on the board. The very value of having the group board is that it attracts people from the community, actually the New Hampshire community. It attracts high quality people. And I think if you read the board bios, not only of the current board, but the board that we started out with back in the 90s. We've been very fortunate to have really quality people. And it reminds me of Bob Beecher. Bob was the the national partner for KPMG, one of the top consulting companies in the country. And Bob said that the complexity of the finances, he was the chair of our board finance committee, the complexity of the finances, it took him, even as national partner for KPMG, it took him 6 months to understand how we do our finances. It's very complex. So what does the board get for being on the board? How much money do you think board members get for being on the board? Zero. Zero. Well, why do they do that? Well, they do it because the people that are attracted are people of high quality that desire to make a difference in their community. And in fact, so many of the board members that I was on back then, one of the reasons, one of the motivations was to make sure that the community that they were on the board for was going to last until they decided to retire. So who was one of those? Me. In fact, Helen and I were always going to move into Riverwoods Exeter. We always had that in our mind. That was what we were going to do. And then I get this letter in the mail. And I was not privy to anything that the boards were discussing because they have their own confidential fiduciary responsibilities. But I got this letter in the mail that was quite the surprise. Justine didn't even share anything with me. And we read this letter and we said, my God, they're building something in Durham. Wrote a check out. That moment, drove to Exeter and gave them our check and said, we want to be first on the list. I don't know if we were the very first, but we were first in line, one of the people that was first in line. And so what happened? We were one of the first people to move into Riverwoods Durham. Why did we move into Riverwoods Durham? Because we put our trust in the various things that I mentioned to you. And with that, I'll pause. Thank you. By the way, faculty members are not used to applause. Thank you.
All right, well, not on. Thank you so much, Raymond. I think that's the most laughter we've heard in here in 3 weeks, so thank you for that. As I said, we're going to take a 5-minute break, stretch, go to the bathroom, grab some more refreshments, and we will plan to start back up here at 2:45. I think we get some waters too. I didn't think you'd want to do that today. Very flashy.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Okay. Sorry for anybody watching online. Definitely making people sick right now. This is the most touching thing I've ever.
Really, it doesn't.
I'm just gonna do you guys with no computer screen.
That's
Unless you want
perfect.
to.
No, because that's what I was
Okay.
saying. We don't really need that.
Okay. Be good. I'm gonna grab some waters. Wait, just message me. This great view. Water bottles.
Water bottles. Think so? Thank you.
Do you want your lavaliers? I'm gonna put this under there.
Just in case, yeah. What's the presenter coming in after? Natalie's like, there's a presenter right after.
Oh, was that today or was that for the one that's in a couple weeks? She
Yeah,
has to
it's
do it
today.
at 3. Oh, okay. Well,
Every time.
Oh, benefits of Oyster River Dam removal.
Sure, I had to do it.
Yeah,
I should be a dad because I am just all about the dad jokes. Her stretch.
Oh.
There we go.
Test, test.
Test, test, test. Huh? Should I put it on this? But I'm aware. Test, test, test. I'll just look to you if I need to adjust. All right, if everyone wouldn't mind making your way back to your seats, we will get started with the rest of this. I understand that we have a very important Saving the Oyster River Dam presentation right after it in here, so. Do you want to come up? Yeah. Yeah, come on up. When you want. Or would you prefer a handheld or? Okay.
I'll just unzip.
Yeah.
Go ahead and test it out. Test.
Test. All right. I think we are good. Well, welcome back, everyone. I did see some people getting some good stretches in, so I'm glad that we incorporated that in. Once again, thank you to Raymond. I thought that was just absolutely fantastic to hear from your point of view, so thank you so much. And our next guest today is Diane Mercier, who is currently the Vice Chair of the TRWG Board. Diana served as People's United Bank President for New Hampshire since 2009. Her career began in New Hampshire in 1985, holding various positions in both regional and commercial banking. Diane holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from Southern New Hampshire University. She currently lives in Manchester, New Hampshire with her husband, John, and they have 2 grown children. And I hear a couple of grandkids now. Diane's civic and charitable activities include board member on the New England Council, former board chair and present board member.
Okay, all that bit's very, very boring.
Oh, okay. Lots of boards,
So,
lots of
yes,
boards and lots of involvement, and her full bio is in there. So
I get the privilege of serving with a lot of really cool people, and you read the bios, and so do I, but I have to say, and I just said this to Raymond, if I could go and redo my bio, it would be his. It would totally be his. He's done amazing, cool things. And I thought the presentation was amazing. And I said, I've been on the board, either one of the 2 boards for the past 12 years. And I learned as much from Raymond about our history and organization, more than I thought I knew even in my 12 years. So it was really great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
And so, that's a great point, that if you're continuing to learn about a board that you've served on, some of the confusion I think we've had recently has been around what are the board's roles exactly. And so having served on both the CCRC board and the group board, can you kind of explain what you see as the biggest differences? And then also, why do we have 2 boards? Why can't it just be one for the group and the communities?
Well, I think Raymond outlined that beautifully, and when he said it's a firewall, if it's a firewall, and it's more than that, it is definitely that. But if it is that, then it needs to be its own organization, and so it needs to have its own separate board. But I'll tell you my experience, and I still sit on the finance committee for the CCRC board, and I was the treasurer for the Riverwoods Group. I was also the board chair I'm the treasurer for Riverwoods when it was its own CCRC before Manchester and Durham, and I was the board chair. And I can't really tell the difference between the work that I do now and what it was then, because Justine always said two things. Her job and our job was two things, and it doesn't change being on the CCRC board, which is the one that oversees every campus, what's happening on the campuses, how are we investing, and the group board, which is how are we seeing things for our campuses 10 or 15 years. Two things, and you'll see it in the mission. She's never let go of it. Protect the core and grow. Those are the only two things that Justine has ever said that she's ever worried about. And so when you protect the core, right, the group protected the core from future developments by insulating it from, from liability if that went wrong. So that was a protecting the core piece. But another protecting the core piece is, how can I make sure that we're making the right investments that are going to keep these communities with the very best services and technology, and assuring that we fulfill our promises to our residents by taking the very best care that we can and providing you the technology that you will want to do that. So it's not just technology, it's clinical programs, it's the emerging technologies, it's how are people living. I mean, we didn't used to have open dining areas. They were all very formal, small dining rooms, and these communities continue to grow, and we need someone to sort of envision that for the future. So we're protecting the core by ensuring the communities are as vibrant and safe, as financially secure as they can possibly be. And then we're thinking about what is the next really cool thing that we can do. Whether it's, can we find another Manchester to be a part of us? Can we go to Dover? Can we build another campus? Is there a different way to look at the healthcare centers? That's our work.
And then I think that really speaks to what both boards do. But if I'm a resident and I'm saying, I only want you to focus on protecting the core, how as a board member would you say, it has to be both, though? It has to be, you're protecting this, and that might be your CCRC board hat, but the group hat is saying we have to further our mission.
Well, it would be really hard for someone from Durham to say that because Durham exists because the good people at Exeter created the group, right? So the people who started at Riverwoods Exeter and then did the Ridge and then did the Boulders, if they had all said, I only want you to protect this core, no other core, there would be no Durham. Because the money that the group invested in Durham could only come from one place. It came from Exeter. And the money that we've invested in changing the lives of the people who live in the Manchester, Riverwoods Manchester, could only come from one place. It came from Exeter. And so I guess we're just not going to do that. We're going to make sure that we fulfill our promise to every resident in this community. That's what we promised, and that's what you expect from us. But it doesn't mean that we won't do anything else ever. And you should be grateful for that. And I know that you are, because you're here.
Very well said. Are you in the light a lot?
I was in theater in high school,
so I'm
fine.
She's used to the spotlight.
Yeah. Want us to do
okay. Yes.
We take direction well.
Yes. Better? Okay. Now, maybe the light was on the back end there. So, one of the things that Raymond talked about was that, even from a board member standpoint, it took several months to be able to understand the financials. And I think one of the concerns is, particularly for a newer board member, how does Riverwoods prepare you to both understand the organization and then fulfill your fiduciary duty?
Well, you do not need to understand the financials the way that accountants and bankers do in order to be a good fiduciary board member. You really rely on, and that's why you have auditors, right? You have accountants that provide an independent assessment. And we also are audited by the insurance company, and we have an actuarial study done. So I would say that you should demand that your CFO understand the intricacies of your financial statements. That would be important, but your board members do not have to. They can we fulfill our fiduciary responsibilities by ensuring that there are procedures and processes and management in place that understand all that stuff. Otherwise, we start to become management, and that's a problem. We're not management. We govern. And so what do we do to make sure that our fiduciary responsibilities are upheld? We approve the auditor every year. We make sure that we have the right audit. We meet with auditors without management around to say, is there anything that we should know that you haven't told anyone yet? Or is there anything that we should know that you have told people, but you're concerned about? We ask those questions. So we have an investment committee, and we have an investment policy statement. I'm not an investment person, but I understand that a policy statement tells my money managers, don't take any more risk than this, and don't leave my money idle any more than that. So that's really how you fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities as a board member, is by making sure that around everything that's important, there's a policy, there's a procedure, and you approve those policies and procedures. And that includes human resources. Now, I don't know about every human resource issue that comes up, but I know there's a process for dealing with it.
That's great. And so, as a member of the finance committee too, I mean, you were a part of the conversations for years about when the concept of available assets started, and then certainly now when Durham met the requirements for the calculation. Can you speak to any of sort of that discussion? Was that a unanimous approval, and what was the impetus behind that and some of the dialogue?
I was there when I was part of the construct when the available assets formula was put together, and around for all the subsequent modifications to that. And we came up with a formula that we wanted to be very conservative. We wanted to make sure that there was no way that any money was going to be taken out of. Now remember, the group wasn't formed yet. So I was a member of the CCRC board while we were doing this, because the group didn't exist. We had to create the group. We created the group. The group didn't come in and buy the communities. The community manifested it. And so in doing that, we created the documents that said, here's how we're going to govern. So I'm on the CCRC board, and we create this formula. It's actually not a complicated formula. You would understand it, the words of it. But what happened was we created this formula, and we said, this looks really conservative. Evan, go run the math. Here are the words in the formula. Go do the math. And he came back with the math, and we said, that's too much money. No, that's too much money. So if this happens, if we lose money, double the amount of the loss and deduct it from the amount that you can. We kept going back to make it as conservative as we possibly could. And it is a really conservative formula. And we've modified it since, and we only modify it to become more conservative, because we want to make sure if there's any loss, if any of the communities are generating a loss, we want to make sure that there's money for the future to make up for that loss. If there's any capital investment that we plan to make, we want to make sure that that money stays in the communities. And there are a number of other factors in there. And then, in addition to that, you have the bankers who have said, I love the formula. It's really great. But we're going to cap you. And so and the banks are saying, that's fine, but while you have debt, we want it to be less. And so it is like everything in life is this tension, right? You want to have the right amount of tension. And if things are too tense, then nothing ever moves. You're kind of stuck. But if there's not enough tension, then somebody's always imbalanced. I'm always, I'm losing and you're winning, or you're winning and I'm losing, or neither one of us are doing anything. And so that available asset formula was what we said was, okay, we're kind of in harmony with each other, and we can invest in the future of these communities. That was the balance that we were looking for.
And so you would have been on the board when the initial conversations around starting Durham would have happened and that initial seed money. Do you remember any of the dialogue then about how those available assets would be used? So in 2000,
Yeah.
in 2013, Exeter first funded, their portion of that, and then when Durham, let me back up. I think some of the sort of concern has been that when this money moves,
Oh.
there's no way to say what it's going for. So now
Right.
you had, probably a set of about 4 to 5 years before Durham was even a thing, but you had this money sitting from Exeter.
Right.
So how did the board then start talking about and know, like, okay, let's take this chunk of money as seed money to build this new community?
Yeah. I mean, these conversations are always going to be asked, and I think that's a feature of the system. It's not a bug in the system that people are going to ask those questions, and I think it makes for very good dialogue. The part where we go awry is when someone says, "I'm going to approve every decision that you make," like whoever I am. I want to have control over this and have say over this. And that's just not how good businesses run. It just has to be a dialogue. So I hope that those dialogues continue, but ultimately it is the group's responsibility to make the best decision about where the funds are invested. And the group does that with feedback from the communities. It does that with feedback from the residents. It does that when Justine gets on a plane and goes down to Miami to meet with her peer group of CEO of other CCRCs from around the country, and they talk about the 20 coolest things that are happening in CCRCs right now. And she sends an email and says, I've just taken 20 pages of notes of really amazing things that are happening. That's where we get all of our information. So instead of, I think from the perspective of a resident, the way that I would guide a resident to think about this money moving to the group and understanding once it moves, the group makes the decision. The real question that the residents should be asking is, what filters do you use for your decision making? I understand that I'm not going to be the decider of where the money goes, but how do you decide where the money goes? I can tell you that now because we have them. So the filters that we use right now, we are very dedicated to mission. We don't think we've done enough work around mission. Raymond talked about this. We don't pay taxes. The reason that not-for-profits exist, tax status only, the only reason that they exist is because the government is expecting us to use the money that we would otherwise be paying in taxes to benefit the community so that they don't have to use those tax dollars for social services. That's the point of a not-for-profit. You don't have to pay taxes, just use that money for charitable purposes. We build really fancy buildings. The government's having a hard time finding the charity in that. Like, they're asking us, how would we be using our tax dollars to do this work? So we need to be mindful of that, because the choice that you have to make is you're either going to pay the government in taxes, or you're going to use the money to reinvest in the community to do charitable work. I think that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, that would be a no-brainer for me. Put it back in my community and do charitable good work. A lot of that we do, right now we focus that on benevolence, but we need to do better. We need to go out in the communities and do better with that money. So mission is a filter. What's the risk? That's a filter, high, low, medium. What's the impact? How much impact will this have on our communities? Will this be a game changer for the people in our communities and for the communities of the future? And how easy will it be for us to do? So we sort of rate all of those things and filter them out, and then we take like 30 ideas and distill them down to 5. So if your filters are working right, and they are the right filters, and you should ask, what are those filters and how do you decide them? And we used a third party to come in and help us sort of organize our thinking around that. Then I think what you have to say is, now that I understand what those filters are, I can only grade you based on the record that you have. Like, what is your record for doing the right thing? Pretty good, don't you think? I mean, that you can't judge us on a decision that we're going to make in the future. You have to judge us on the decisions that we've made in the past. Filters, record, trust.
That's very perfectly said. And as someone who is very passionate about mission work, both in other boards you serve on and here at Riverwoods, one of the terms that has come up a couple times recently has been mission creep.
Oh, yeah.
And, what would your response be to that, to someone to say, hey, I want to avoid or be careful of mission creep?
So, if I ask 12 people here what mission creep is, I'm going to do 12 different answers. So, whatever your flavor of mission creep is, you can be very narrow in what you think you're going to do, and you can think very broadly about what you're going to do. And so mission creep is going to be different for everybody on that spectrum. My view of mission creep is, I've seen organizations that do mission creep. Here's an example. We're going to take care of kids after school. We think kids need a place to go after school. And they start going there after school, and then they read a report that says, you know what? The kids that come here, they very often don't have very good dental care. I'm going to open up a dentist office in the back here, and the kids can come and get dental work done. Me, I think that's mission creep. Like, you're taking care of kids. You got to hire a dentist. You got to build right? You can connect the dots, but you're creeping outside and distracting a lot of capital from making a big impact because you're investing a ton of money in a really tiny thing that is sort of connected to what you do, but isn't really.
We've seen that a little bit too on some of the employee surveys we've had and interviewing, because we've had the suggestion many times about, why don't you open an on-site daycare? Wouldn't that help your employees? And when we've looked into that in the past, many have said, no, we have family that watches the kids, or we do that. And so there could be that piece of the market to expand and do more of a mission piece for staff, but it just doesn't always seem like that might be the best thing for us. So, we continue to explore as an organization of how that should look.
And you put that through a filter, right? Like, that's a great idea. I happen to think daycare is a big problem for young people. It's very, very expensive. It's like, I don't know, is it $500 a week? Like,
sometimes
a week?
At least, yeah.
A week and more. Like, for infants, it's even more. So I think that's a barrier for employees. So you run it through a filter, and you kind of do the math and the work of it, and you get to the conclusion. Because the original idea is a great thesis. But the conclusion is, you know what, it wouldn't impact enough of the people that worked here to be a game changer for employment.
Yep. And that's, really focusing again on the mission. One of the things that Raymond said was, hey, we have this new mission statement coming out. And I alluded to that a couple of weeks ago with you, because I said, whoa, I don't want to come April and you hear we have this new mission and you think I didn't tell you. But Diane was actually part of a big part of the work that some groups did, of residents from all 3 communities, as well as staff members. And you were probably one of the most passionate voices in the room during those meetings. So can you just kind of talk about what I tried to explain was, hey, the mission has never really changed. The words might, the purpose might, but elaborate a little on that and why it might be time for us to update the language.
Well, I mean, a lot of you may know this already, but mission statements are required when you want to be a charitable organization, and very often they're drafted by the attorney so that they'll meet the criteria. And there's nothing wrong with attorneys. I'm sure your father was an excellent one. But they're snoozers. Like they really are, they're either bland or they're long or they're, I mean, they're just like, they're not inspirational at all. And you know, the for-profits are even worse, but you're required to say, hey, here's, so we have a mission statement and a vision statement, and they're both fine. But they, you know, like if you're an employee that comes to work here, if you're someone that's coming to work into this community, that something out there should call to you about why you're here, and it should connect you here. And so a mission statement is why the founders started the thing. And a vision statement is where I want to be. And there's not anything in there at all that talks about why people come here every single day. Why am I here today? Why am I even showing up today? And so we just said, you know, we don't really need to talk about why we formed ourselves and where we want to go. What we need to tell you is, why are you here today? What do we believe? And why would the best people in the world who are here to take care of this community, why should they show up every day? So we came up with a purpose statement, like, to tell us what is the purpose every single day when we come here.
And I think after the past 2 years that we've had, you know, it's the right time for that. You know, people, I think we all lived through that. You know, during the pandemic, you needed a purpose. You needed. I look at our mask makers all the time. I do new hire orientations a couple times a month. Yes, Pam, go mask makers. But you know, I share those pictures and I tell the story of, you know, you would wake up every day and you would come down and you would sew for us. And it didn't matter, you know, if you were tired from the day before. It didn't matter if you could sew. You know, we had people who were cutting the strings and ironing. And you know, the best day was when you told me you wanted cookies and wine, because that was a purpose too. And I had purpose to go to Hannaford every morning for that. I don't think my husband has baked since, but you know, those were all baked with love. But it just, you felt that purpose. And we have a group of residents right now, Team Seacoast, who's doing some amazing work for an Afghani refugee project.
Oh, well, that's
and getting a family here and housed, and it's just incredible. And so I think what I've personally seen too is when you have that purpose and what you're here for, you just see it resonate throughout so much more of your work and your interactions. And it goes to what we always say too, is we is bigger than me, you know, and it's kind of about what we're all doing together in community.
And always resident in all of our in all of our documentation and everything that's been ritualized at the board is not for self. This is not as simple as doing something just for yourself. It should never be about that. What happens to us should be a product of what we're doing and not what we are doing. Right? Does that make sense? We're creating this environment that we're going to benefit from, but if we're doing it just for ourselves, you're going to make different decisions.
So as someone who, you know, you've been involved in a lot of boards, you are sought after, what made you want to join Riverwoods on the board? You know, what drew you to our organization?
You know, Justine. So
I won't tell her.
She knows.
She knows.
She knows. Everything's a community, right? This is a community. The board is a community. We're our own community, and you get attracted to people that you feel a kinship to, and intelligent people working hard and having fun. That's like my Venn diagram, you know. That's how I like to. That's my own personal filter for how I like to spend my time. And that was so evident in the board, but first it was really evident in Justine. She's a lot of fun, she's really smart, and she's a very hard worker. She does not take herself very seriously at all, but she takes this so seriously. I knew nothing about CCRCs before I met Justine. Here's how I met her. She came, we came to see Justine when the Boulders was being built. The Boulders was being built in 2009. Anybody remember the trifling that was going on in this country in 2009? The economic crisis? Real estate fell through the floor. The Boulders was almost constructed. No one could sell their home to move into the Boulders. It was a problem. So Justine said, I got a couple of banks. They're my banks. I need some help. They can't help me. I'm like, all right, sign me up. And she said, I have people that want to move here tomorrow. They can't sell their homes. They need a bridge loan. And I went, oh, they're very bad for banks because they're very short in duration. You don't make money off of them. I mean, I am for profit. So I said, oh, Justine, I don't think we do those. And she said, nobody does because they make no sense for a business. And I said, okay, but let me see what I can do. And so I went back and I met with a few people and I said, look, this is Riverwoods. This is what they're doing. This is the problem that they're having. These are the people they're trying to help. We're not going to make money, but we're not going to lose money. And a lot of those residents are our customers. We did it. So we did it. So we got that done. And then 6 months later, Justine shows up in my office and she says, thank you for all of that help. That was amazing. We didn't do more than 20, by the way. So it's not like everybody took advantage of that. But the people, every person that wanted to do it was able to do it. So she said, so you're going to come sit on my board. I'm like,
Sounds very Justine-like.
yeah. I said, oh, no, I'm not. I'm so not. And okay, here I am.
Yep.
15 years later. It's been in it, but it's been great. I mean, I've gotten as much out of it. I've gotten way more out of it than I ever put in. I really do understand CCRCs. I really did learn a lot that helped my business because I learned a lot about I do a lot of CCRC business now because I understand them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was helped, but I didn't do it for that purpose, but it was a product of what happened because I did this.
Is there anything as a board member you're kind of most proud of, either personal contribution or what the board has, been able to further our mission?
I don't think being on a board and serving in a board environment warrants any personal contributions because the board really does act as its own person. It becomes a single entity and it makes very different decisions as a group than it would as a bunch of individuals. So I think the thing that I'm most grateful for is that I've been able to learn from a lot of these really wonderful people around the board. And the fact that Manchester was a tough community. The residents there were not having the most optimum experience. They were financially struggling. Because they were financially struggling, there was deferred maintenance in the property, and it just wasn't what we would have wanted for the residents. And so and it wasn't easy. It's really hard to say we weren't able to do this, so we're going to let you do it. The board there had a very hard time with that. That is a really hard thing to do. Justine never let it go. Mm-hmm. Never let it go. And she was able to convince them, because in not-for-profits, you don't buy or sell things. They just become part of you. And the transformation of Riverwoods Manchester has been phenomenal. It's been a slog. It's been hard. But it's very rewarding because people are living a different life now than they would have otherwise. So I think as a board, I feel most proud that we made that decision. This was a very easy decision. So I'd love to say I'm really proud of it. It was so easy.
I think the last question I want to ask you is, before we turn it over to everyone else's questions, is, as residents who come in here and we talk about purpose and we talk about, you know, community and peace of mind and all the things that we're offering, you know, sometimes residents do confuse resident driven with meaning resident run. And so, you know, what advice would you have for a resident, you know, knowing what you know about our business and Riverwoods in general, you know, residents who do want to get involved or have a voice or find that purpose, what would your advice be to them when they're living here?
You know, like, I mean, this is life, right? This isn't a resident issue. This is like a life issue. So it's no different being a resident than just living in the world. I serve on a board. Uh, if I told you that every decision that every board made was unanimous, I would be lying, and you would say, if every decision that a board makes is unanimous, you have a very bad board. It just, right? It just, that's not how it should work. There should be dissenting voices. There should be dissenting opinions. The problem only becomes when that dissenting opinion or that dissenting voice doesn't want to be part of a process. It wants to overtake the process and say, I know 400 of you feel this way, but I feel this way, and I won't stop until I get the 400 of you to agree with me. That is also life. I mean, that's not new to a community, a CCRC community. I work with people like that. I live with people like that, and so do you. But there are not that many of them, and you, as the residents, are the ones that need to ultimately say, we've spoken as a community. We understand and hear you, and we've been informed by your good voice. But we've made this decision as a community, and we're comfortable with it. You are the only ones who are going to be able to affect that. Management won't be able to affect that. You can write letters and have meetings and have, focus groups. The residents are the only one. The broader group is the only group that's going to be able to say, we've been made better by your information. We've been informed by it, but we're making a different decision. Same thing as a board. Like, if there's 4 board members and there's a 15-member board and there are 4 who go, yeah, I just don't think that's the right thing to do, but the others all say, we do, then as a board you take a vote and you walk out of that boardroom having voted and having made a decision. You're no longer the 4 people who didn't agree to it. You're the board that made the decision. That
Yeah, no, I think
seem reasonable?
Yeah.
It's just we try and think it's like, it's just life.
No, it's life, and this is another chapter of life for many people, and so that same cycle continues. But I think that was a great way to put it. I'm going to invite Raymond to come back up, and then we're going to turn it over for questions from you all. So Brianna is in the back with a microphone, and now the light hit me. And we will pass those around. Make sure, again, just remember to wait for the microphone and then speak into that. Yeah, have a seat. I'll stand up here this time, and you can turn that back on. All right, any questions?
Yes.
Bill.
Yes, it's me. I'm maybe that one person in 400. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. First, a statement. And the statement is, I started by asking 3 very simple questions, just based on my own business experience. What was the $1.5 million be used? Was it to be used for purposes that were in the best interest of Riverwoods Durham? And the third question is, are residents properly represented in the governing mechanism? Those were the only questions. I still have not received complete answers to those questions. I have to say that sadly. I've written a letter to Kathy Trower, the president or the chair of the board of CCRC, in those questions. And the answer I got was basically, no. What is the money going to be used for? It's going to be used to support the mission. And we're a mission-driven organization, and we have a legal mission. By the way, that mission is not the same as you've heard several times today. We've talked about several different missions. One of the missions was included in my original contract I signed. It's not the legal mission. That is supposed to be the guideline for spending our money. Now, that's a little background. Why was I concerned with those three questions? It just seemed to me to be a matter of fiduciary responsibility, having dealt with boards before. Very simple questions. What are you going to use the money for? And is it in our best interest? I was told, no, we aren't going to, we didn't investigate that. It's for the mission only. And no, it's not. You have to look at a best interest that's broader than just Riverwoods Durham. It's okay if I got that answer. I didn't get that answer. And then finally, about resident participation on the board. Part of the letter I got back, and I'll be happy to share it with people, is that we have resident participation, but we don't want too much of it. We don't think that residents should be decision makers.
Bill, I'm sorry. I do have to stop you there because
Well,
I was in your
yes,
seat.
you've done a fairly good job in several communications. I just wanted, it seems to me that I should have a right to at least explain myself because you have an awfully big microphone. And I've been accused of some things that I don't think I've done. So as far as being a resident-driven community and open to some dialogue, I haven't seen as much as I would like to see.
Would you like me to try and answer those three questions for you?
Yes, that would be very helpful.
So the first question is, what is the 1.5 million going to be used for, and
Right.
is it for the best interest of Riverwoods Durham?
Mm-hmm.
So if the question is, do we know particularly and specifically what are you doing with that $1.5 million? Meaning, are you building generators outside Exeter with it, or what are you doing with it?
It could be more general than that.
So the answer to that is, nope, we don't know what we're doing with it. We have not committed that money. And when we moved the money from Exeter to the group, we had not committed it to Durham either. It had just moved to the group as a result of the agreement about how the formula was going to work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So no, we have not earmarked that money. We are filtering all of these decisions now about what are we going to do next.
Mm-hmm.
So the money moves before the decision has been made
Right.
in some cases, and in this case,
So,
it has. So that's the answer.
Right. And so in terms of whether it serves our interest or not, we won't know until that money is spent.
No,
Is that right?
that's a question that you asked, so I'll answer it. Everything that we do benefits this organization and
I
this
would hope so.
organization only.
Okay.
We do two things, as I mentioned. We protect the core, and we grow the organization. How does growing the organization help the existing communities?
All for growth. I have no problem.
Yeah, so those are the only two things that we do. We don't do anything else. So if the fear is that or the worry or the concern or the interest is that we're going to do something that isn't one of those two things, the answer is no.
The big fear I have is not just the $1.5 million. It's an automatic formula that calculates available assets every year,
Yep.
transfers them automatically to group, discussed,
Yep.
as long as it's consistent with the mission.
Right.
And I've also asked the question, well, have you projected how much money that's going to end up being in the next 20 years?
Well, that would be
I got an
impossible
answer
because
that
it's
said, no, we only calculate
You
that
can't-
once a year.
you can't calculate into the future because it would presume that we know what capital expenditures are going to be and listen, I know we can go down a big rabbit hole here, so let's just stay up to those three questions. The answer to that question is no, we cannot calculate what it will be in 20 years, and the answer to that is because it's based on profitability, because it's based on capital needs assessments and
Right.
because it's based on the performance of the communities. So
So
those are things that you need to be in the moment to do that formula.
it could be a huge amount of money.
It's all,
couldn't
there
it?
are also caps.
Okay, but it could be a huge amount of money, which
be.
is one of the issues I think that's important.
It would
for
only
everybody
be
to understand.
huge if the communities are doing well. It will, and you know, I can ask 12 people what huge means, and I'll get 12 different answers to
Mhm.
huge. So it will only be, it will only move up and down with the way that the communities are performing. If the communities cannot afford to send it, then they won't.
So, okay, so again, running a business, people do cash flow projections over the years. It's not always accurate.
We do actually do those, and that's a fiduciary responsibility of ours. We do cash flow projections, but we don't transfer money based on projections. We transfer money based on action.
So in your projections, I assume that you've made some sort of assumption about how much
Absolutely
the
not.
available assets would be?
Absolutely not,
Okay,
because we don't understand what the capital needs are going to be.
okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Did I miss any?
No, I think you got that. And Bill, I apologize if you think that my microphone is too big. I feel slightly differently that the first meeting you had with us was February 1st with Kevin and Justine for 2 hours. We've now had 6 hours of education sessions, an hour-long
Steal-
resident council
Can I steal
forum.
your water?
And you have written to the board chair who wrote back to you, and the Department of Insurance. So from where I am standing, I do feel like your voice has been heard, and we've answered all 3 of those questions each week. And I'm hoping that maybe what Diane said can wrap that up for it, because we've said that same answer now about how the money would be used.
But the question about resident representation, there are residents on the CCRC board, and there were residents when we designed the structure of the Riverwoods group, and there were residents present when we approved the formula. So yes, you are absolutely represented, and those voices matter a great deal.
Yep.
I have one question on this transfer. When we started, we got a transfer from you guys. Start this. Was that $1.5 million or more or less?
I think it was 9.
Six or nine?
9 million.
9 million.
So what we're essentially is partially paying back what we used to build this place.
Yeah, we don't really look at it as pay. I appreciate your saying that, but yeah, because I wouldn't want to say that though, because there was nothing for Exeter to pay back. When Exeter made its first contribution, they weren't paying anything back. They were paying it forward. And by the way, the reason that this matters is the more we're able to do, right? You all understand there's overhead, right? There are people like Kim and Justine and Kevin. They don't add to revenues at all. They just cost you money day in and day out. They're a huge weight to bear. I am myself overhead. What you want to do is disperse that overhead over as many communities as possible so that it is a smaller fee to you. If they cost $100,000 and there's only one community, that community bears $100,000. But if there are 4 communities, now those 4 communities share that and everybody pays only $25,000. And you know, incrementally that changes, but that's the idea of it. So our idea for growth and investing in other communities and using some of this money for that community, we want to keep your fees as low as possible. And we do that by purchasing more and getting more discounts and decreasing costs. And so that's also part of why we take some of this money to invest in growth to keep those fees down and pay these exorbitant, outrageous salaries.
I'll show myself out. Next question, Mary?
Em, you've heard this before, and I'm sorry to bother you again, but I'm really eager to hear a more time factor to my question. Across the road, where a lot of the trucks park, there's this nice little piece of property. I'd like to see that piece of property used in the months when the weather is sunny and warm as another place to have dining. I think it would be possible to have a group of maybe 10 tables over there. I know that there are some CRCs that have netting above outdoor residents. And I've asked 3 times now, can't we please have a place with some nice birch trees and maybe 10 or 15 tables where we would have another choice for lunch or maybe even dinner when the weather is fine? Is it possible that you might have come up with an answer yet?
Sad to say no, but it's not. It is something we're also thinking of. There have been no formal plans for anything with the land, but I know that to your point, more dining space, particularly outdoors, has been one of the biggest requests. So as we are working through the budget process right now, which will be 2 presentations from now, 2 weeks, Kevin is here, and we'll walk through how we look at the budgets, how we will start talking about the land across the street and taking all of those great ideas. But as soon as we can get tables there, Mary, I'm there for lunch too. I think it's a good spot. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah, John.
First of all, thank you, Diane and Raymond. Those 2 presentations were spectacular.
Thank you.
As to my question, I know, Diane, you said that the available assets formula was, you kind of all struggled with it. I understand that. And then even after it was approved, you, to use a non-technical term, fiddled with it to try to improve it a little bit.
Yep.
And that's good. But I'm wondering if it isn't maybe slightly still flawed somehow or other. And let me explain why I ask you that question. Usually when an engineer or an accounting person looks at the results of whatever a formula or a computer software program produces, they try to give it a kind of a rationality check, sensibility check. Does this make sense? And in that regard, I'm having this little issue in the back of my mind because Riverwoods Durham has contributed $1.5 million or $10,000 per apartment. That's a big piece of change. And yet, at least as I understand it, up through December, we've been bleeding cash. Maybe that's too strong a word. We've been cash negative. We've been losing cash. That is not very good. At the same time, we have only half of our nursing floor opened. It was such a delight to get the first half opened. It gave us an ability to say, well, you know what? Now we are really a full service CCRC. That was a great feather, I think, in Kim's hat to pull that off. But on the other hand, it's only half open. One of Kevin's objectives, as he stated a week or so ago, several weeks ago, was to open the balance of it this year. That would be fantastic, but it's going to cost money. And also, we're still making a lot of use of volunteer work in our dining room and in other places. And while those who participate in that work may be enjoying the social advantage of being with other people, doing similar community-oriented work. Remember, we're all in for RWD. Thank you very much, Kim. And then lastly, we know that we're going to expect rather a significant, some people say huge, increase in our monthly service fee in just a few months. So I know everybody hates that. I know, I'm sorry I had to say it quite as strongly as I did, but it is a worry. And from the sensibility point of view, the rationality point of view, I'm wondering, should the formula have anticipated that maybe Riverwoods Durham would need a little more cash and maybe not squirrel away $10,000 an apartment in view of these things that it organizationally is going to have to face up to? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. So when you think about your own personal financials, there's this pot of money that you have that you've already earned, and it's sitting there and it's investable. It's cash that you have, and then there's the income that you make during the year. And typically speaking, you make your big investments from this pot, which is the cash that you already have. That, to me, that's the balance sheet of Riverwoods Durham, the cash that you already have. And then there's the income that you get from the monthly service fees and the expenses that you pay in order to live here. Again, Kim's salary. The health center should be completely decoupled from your cash flow. There's cash balances and cash flow. Your health center opening has nothing to do with the cash flow of Riverwoods Durham. It is, what do you have available for cash in order to open it? That's an investment. You don't make investments from your profit and loss statement, you make investments from your cash. You spend money from your cash flow on things. So the health center opening doesn't have anything really to do with the formula, because the formula takes into account the cash flow, but also the capital expenses. So whatever is needed for the health center is part of the math. It's already in the equation. So when you say we're losing money, that's another very complex things about CCRCs, because really cash comes into this organization two ways: the money that you pay for entrance fees and the money that you pay for monthly service fees. Those things get accounted for in very weird, tyrannical accounting ways. It's bizarre, and I've been banking for 35 years, and it's the only industry that does it this way. Sometimes you look at it with your entrance fees in, sometimes you look at it with the entrance fees out. And if you strip those entrance fees out, sometimes you can go, oh my God, like this is a bad situation. But the entrance fees are still part of cash that comes into Riverwoods. You've got to pay the refunds as well, but refunds never get paid before someone else comes in and takes that apartment, right? So there are ways that you can frame out the finances to make it look really comfortable, and there are ways that you can frame it out that make it look really scary. There are very few CCRCs that can operate their business only on monthly service fees. Very rare. They are the highest rated CCRCs in the industry. Most of them rely on some portion of entrance fees to cover operational shortfalls. So I understand what you're saying. We haven't really stabilized our operations to cover all of our expenses on our monthly fees only. And that may be true. I don't particularly know that for a fact because I don't see these financials as closely as, right? So that but when you look at all the entrance fees, it's like, if you didn't have that, if that wasn't working that way, the formula wouldn't have worked for money to go up.
And John, right now we are actually cash flow positive, but something even beyond not being able to open those last 12 units in the health center that's impacting us is that, if you remember, when we opened, our population is about 56% couples. So we've had more spouses transition to Newfound than we have single residents, which means it's not opening up an independent apartment to then be resold. So right now, we are 100% occupied in independent living. We have no inventory to take in that large entrance fee deposit. So part of why we are cash flow positive, though, is because the budget assumed that we'd be 96% occupied in independent living, and we've been running at 99 or 100. So that's helping us. And over time, you're going to see that start to shift as more people do transition into Newfound, which would then turn over an IL apartment that we can resell. The great news is you know, that in the meantime, while that's full, it is allowing us to grow our wait list more. So as of today, we have 105 people on the independent waiting list. So they're just waiting to come in. So that will only benefit us more too, once we just start to see the couple mix shift a little bit. And that's, you know, Kevin and Justine, we've given a lot of presentations around, in a typical startup CCRC, it's going to take 3 to 4 years to really balance and even out. We came out of the gate strong. And so I think that set this really high expectation that we're going to be fine after the first 1.5 to 2 years. And we honestly probably would have been in an even greater position had it not been for the pandemic. But that just, it falls within the realm of these first 4 years. So I think give us a little bit more time for all these factors to level out. And then each year you'll see the budget process. And Tom's going to do a fantastic presentation for us next week that will walk through that infamous bubble chart that Kevin goes over a lot. And to remind you again of what Diane said, how the cash comes in, how the cash goes out, and you know, really the status of that. And every week or every 2 weeks, we get this report from finance. It's our liquidity report. And Kevin always writes 2 words that I love to see: we're fine. So got that this morning and sharing that. We're fine.
And by the way, it's a great question. That point that you made is, you gotta, once you do the math, you have to say, does this make sense? I promise you, every year, every goal that financial goal that we set for ourselves, every quartile that we say we need to be in terms of performance, this formula in particular, every year we get here's what the math said, here are the pros and cons. It's not just math. Here are the pros for doing it the way that we're doing it. Here are the reasons we should do it the way that we're doing it. And here are some reasons we might want to think about doing it a different way. Every single year.
Other questions? None? So looking ahead to next week, we do have Tom McCann, who is our chair of your finance committee. Kevin may also be here too, just to share some more updates as well. And we'll be back here again next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Thank you all, and thank you again very much to Diane and Raymond for today.